Okay, I set up a quick little project here, a PHP file. I'm using Microsoft's Visual Code, and that's really somewhat irrelevant here. The important part is that I'm using the GitHub Copilot here. See this little, I think it's supposed to be a monkey here, a little icon down here. That is the symbol that basically Copilot is running right now. And you'll see this pretty soon. The way I'm going to use GitHub Copilot here is how a non-developer would most likely use it by just writing comments and then have Copilot come up with the code. So let's select the name, email address, and message from an input form that was submitted via a post. Okay, request. And it even suggests some comments here to me. And okay, now this, what you see in gray here is all suggested by a GitHub Copilot. And whenever I click press tab here, I'm accepting the suggestion. Okay, and I'm just going with it here. I probably would not have as elaborate of a comment here. I wanted actually to really write code here. Once you do an empty line, you usually get that. I don't really like this sort of inclusion of a random input.php here. That's something else we would have to write. So let's just start with an if here. So I'm going to type if. See how it basically selects the data from the field, from the post variable. Nothing really terribly bad here, other than that you probably should do some kind of input validation at this point. Of course, that could be done later. There are better ways to do sort of retrieve variables like this in PHP, but this is sort of how a beginner PHP developer would probably do it, and how I have done it very often myself. Okay, then we get the email address and the message. Note how it kind of recognizes the different items that are described up here. The name, email, and message. Okay, we got the data here. Now let's create the HTML page, and again, I let it do it. So the only thing I'm going to press here is tab and enter. And okay, so here it comes up with a little style sheet. Nothing really wrong with this. Inline style sheets, yeah, probably should put in a separate file, but for quick form like this, certainly acceptable, I think. And notice how I sometimes have to wait a little bit for it to come up with a suggestion. You can sometimes speed it up, I find, by just hitting enter and having an empty line. And okay, here we got our form now. And here's sort of the one big problem that I noticed with a GitHub Copilot. It will just insert the data that we picked up here from the form without any kind of encoding, input validation, or whatsoever. So that's, I think, not that great. Let's see if we can add some input validation now. So I'm going back up here and check if email is a valid email address and see what it comes up with here. Okay, it uses here the filter function, which is okay. So that's a PHP filter function to check this is a valid email. And then we could sort of, we have to, actually let me rewrite this a little bit. Set the email variable to an empty string if it is not a valid email. Let's see what it does here. Yeah, I like this a little bit better. So that's basically just sets it to an empty string. And actually, it suggests this here. Let me see how it would validate the message. Message, of course, can be anything. No real great way to validate that, but let's see what it comes up with here. Okay, it really only now checks, is the message larger than 10 characters? You may have seen this in various input forms where it will basically, only accept the message if it exceeds a certain length. Okay, not great, I think, but let's go with this. And let's actually try to insert the data into a database. So if the, let me rewrite this a little bit here. Like, so if it redirects us if it's not empty, but I want to do something different here. If the email and message are not empty, insert them into the database. And actually, it already came up with that for me. So, okay, let's see how it does that. So let's see how it does the database part. Nothing suggested here. Is it at a loss? Let's see. Let me just get started here a little bit with the if part. I'm typing this now, so it's not doing that for me. That's a little bit surprising. It should do this. There may be some performance issue just where it's not really all that fast. Yeah. Let me just type PDO. Let's see if it does anything with that. No. Okay, actually, yeah, here it did. I didn't wait quite long enough. Let me make that a little bit different. I think it's currently just a little bit slow. That sometimes happens. Yeah. Yep, okay. Other interesting choice here that it uses root as password. Of course, I didn't tell it any password. I accept this as a placeholder. Of course, you never should have passwords in your code like this. But let's just go with this and see where it comes next here. So, okay, it creates the SQL statement. It prepares it. It binds the parameters. That executes. Not the prettiest way of doing it, but certainly, it does avoid the SQL injection part here. It does use prepared statements. So cross-site scripting, nope, failed that. It at least does the SQL injection stuff right. Let's actually try a little bit something here. Escape let's just go with that. To prevent cross-site scripting attacks. Okay, let's see what it comes up with this here. Okay, HTML special chars. That's of the standard way of doing that in PHP. So it's not terribly off here. Of course, a little bit tricky that we are in an attribute here. You have to be a little bit careful with the quotes that they are done correctly with the HTML special chars. They should be done fine. We did allow it to create these, so it created double quotes here. Sometimes you have these attributes without quotes and such. Then, of course, HTML special chars would definitely not be acceptable. But yeah, it does a reasonable job. So anyway, just a quick summary here. Google Copilot, great tool, love it, use it a lot. I use it more with Python, not so much with PHP. But you definitely have to be careful when you are using it sort of to code. It does miss basic security issues. So it's not so much, I think, for someone who is completely new to coding. I like in particular with Python, I'm not the most experienced Python coder, so it helps me a lot. It saves me a lot of Googling, basically. That's what it does when it comes to Python. but I definitely sort of, usually don't write comments and then have it create the code. I'm more likely going to start coding something and then have it sort of suggest completions. That sort of works better for me. And then I want to do a second part of this where I'm just going to basically Google for how do I create something like this. And we'll see what we come up if I just use the old-fashioned way of Googling, the Stack Overflow way, basically, to create the code. So let me just switch here over to my web browser. So okay, I'm now in my web browser. So let's go to Google and then simple PHP /HTML form to collect name, email address, and message, and store it in the database. I usually wouldn't write that elaborate Google queries, but let's say what comes back here. Okay, here we have a PHP contact form with MySQL. Okay, I think this is a little bit more elaborate here than what we have, but let's look at some of the basics. So this is more sort of going the Ajax way with JavaScript and such. Let's see what they're doing here with the... Let me just make this a little bit bigger so you can see this easier. Okay, that's just the database connection. They're using the MySQLi. That's a little bit an older way of doing it. They're also putting usernames and passwords here, database credentials, into the file itself. I sort of let him get away with this here because in little demos like this, everybody does a little bit different how they store their credentials, so that may be a little bit easier. But oh, and then here, that's actually pretty bad here. Okay, no, not super bad, but they're using it as real escape string instead of prepared statements. It sort of works, but definitely not the recommended way of doing it. Not great necessarily here, our first solution. Let's look at, let's see, is there a Stack Overflow one? Stack Overflow is where most people are looking for that. I don't really see anything here. Let's try it. I think that was the third link here where we have this. Okay. Also using MySQLi. Yeah, this is kind of stupid here because it doesn't actually collect the data, it just uses of a static string. So let me see if they have anything else. No. Of working with forms in PHP. Let's see what we got here. Okay, just a simple HTML form. Processing the form. Yeah, definitely have the cross-site scripting part here. So that vulnerability. And does this go anywhere here in the database? Here we have the database part. Oh yeah, and straightforward SQL injection. So in some ways, Google Copilot, based on this small sample here, may actually a little bit better than just simply Googling the solution. But yeah, it's not perfect. Be aware of that. If you ask it specifically to do security stuff, like escape it and things like this, it appears to be doing a reasonable job, but you have to sometimes prompt it to actually create that code for you. Anyway, that's what I have here. Just a simple comparison on how GitHub Copilot. It's GitHub Copilot, not Google Copilot. I sometimes get this wrong. Not sure how often I got this wrong in this video. So GitHub Copilot versus just simply Googling the code. You get actually similar code. I have in some cases gotten identical code because after all, well, Copilot used a lot of that publicly posted code to train itself. And I, in some cases, got code that was identical to code that you can, for example, find on Stack Overflow. Yeah, thank you.